The most disgusting and disturbing things that were once normal in history. You probably don't want any popcorn with this video. 1. Animal poop as medicine. In ancient Egypt and Greece, animal poop was used as medicine. For example, crocodile poop was utilized as a contraceptive, and other types of feces were applied to wounds or even ingested to treat various diseases. While intended to heal, these practices were highly unsanitary and dangerous. Now that would be a fresh prescription. 2. Urine for teeth whitening. Ancient Romans used urine as a mouthwash to whiten their teeth. Urine contains ammonia, which has a bleaching effect, but the practice was obviously unhygienic and foul-smelling. Romans believed in its effectiveness to the extent that they even imported urine from distant places. Just imagine their morning breath. 3. Excremental insulting. In medieval Europe, excremental insulting was a form of punishment with a crappy twist, literally, where offenders were publicly shamed by being smeared with dung or pelted with poop. This was a degrading and humiliating punishment intended to disgrace the person in front of their entire community. 4. Self-mummification of Buddhist monks. In Japan, certain Buddhist monks practiced self-mummification, a process known as sokushinbutsu. Over several years, they would slowly starve themselves and consume toxic substances to reduce body fat, eventually dying in a meditative pose. The body would then naturally mummify. This dead serious process was considered an act of spiritual devotion. 5. Human fat in candles and soap. In the 18th and 19th centuries, the fat from human corpses was occasionally used to make candles and soap. This was not a widespread practice, but did occur, particularly during times of war or following executions, where the bodies of the deceased were repurposed in this disturbing manner. 6. Corpse roads. In medieval England, special pathways known as corpse roads were used to transport the dead from rural areas to churches for burial. These roads were believed to be haunted, with the spirits of the dead traveling along them. Corpses were carried on open biers, exposed to the elements and onlookers, sometimes for days. That would be one nasty traffic jam. 7. Lice as a sign of devotion. In medieval Europe, some religious ascetics believed that lice were a sign of holiness. They refused to wash or clean themselves, allowing lice to infest their bodies as a form of spiritual devotion. The suffering caused by lice was seen as a way to imitate the hardships of saints and martyrs. At least they were itching for a higher cause. 8. Execution by being buried alive. Being buried alive was a method of execution used in various cultures throughout history. They literally dug themselves a hole. During the Qin dynasty in China, scholars who opposed the emperor were sometimes buried alive in masses. This horrifying method was also used in other parts of the world as a punishment for severe crimes or as a form of torture. 9. Ancient Roman shared sponges. In ancient Rome, public toilets were common, but toilet paper was not. Instead, people used a sponge on a stick, known as a tersorium, to clean themselves after defecating. The same sponge was used by multiple people and was simply rinsed in a bucket of water between uses, spreading diseases and infections. Sharing is caring, though. 10. Chamber pots and night soil. Before modern plumbing, chamber pots were used in homes to collect human waste. The contents of these pots, known as night soil, were often dumped out of windows onto the streets below, creating filthy and unsanitary conditions. In some cities, nightmen would collect the waste and dispose of it, but the streets remained notoriously dirty. 11. Bathing practices in medieval Europe. During the medieval period, regular bathing was uncommon and even considered unhealthy by some. People might only bathe once a year, if at all, and it wasn't unusual for them to wear the same clothes for months without washing, truly embracing their natural scent. This contributed to widespread body odor and the proliferation of lice and other parasites. 12. Rotted meat and heavy spices. In medieval Europe, the lack of refrigeration meant that meat would often spoil. Instead of discarding it, people would heavily spice the meat to mask the taste and smell of rot. This was considered normal, despite the risks of food poisoning and other health issues. Don't forget being served a side of death. 13. Corpse medicine and cannibalistic remedies. In the 16th and 17th centuries, Europeans commonly used human remains in medicine. They believed that consuming human flesh, bones, or blood could cure various ailments. Corpse medicine often included powdered skulls or blood as treatments for conditions like epilepsy and internal bleeding. This medicine might have had a few side effects. 14. The death penalty for minor offenses. In 18th century Britain, the legal system imposed the death penalty for over 200 offenses, many of which were minor by today's standards. Crimes like stealing a handkerchief or cutting down a tree on someone else's property could lead to execution, often by hanging in public. 15. Foot binding in China. Foot binding was a common practice among Chinese women from the 10th century until the early 20th century. Young girls' feet were tightly bound to keep them small, which was considered beautiful and a sign of status. This painful process often resulted in permanent disability, with many women unable to walk properly. They still weren't taking any steps towards beauty. 16. Entertainment and death. Public executions were a common spectacle in many societies throughout history. Crowds would gather to watch criminals being hanged, beheaded, or burned at the stake. These events were often treated as social gatherings, with vendors selling food and drinks to spectators as they watched the grisly proceedings. The original dinner and show. 17. Urine prophets. In medieval Europe, urine prophets were medical practitioners who diagnosed illnesses by examining the color, smell, and even taste of a patient's urine. That's one way to go with the flow. The urine was collected in special glass flasks, and doctors would dip their fingers or even sample the urine to assess the patient's health. This was considered a legitimate medical practice at the time. 18. Scalping. A warrior's trophy. Scalping, the act of removing a portion of the scalp with hair attached, was practiced by various indigenous tribes in North America, as well as by European settlers and soldiers. It was used as a way to take trophies from enemies, and sometimes as proof to claim bounties. This practice is deeply disturbing and involved horrific violence. 19. Cannibalistic revenge. Some cultures, including certain tribes in Papua New Guinea and historical cases in Europe, practiced cannibalism as a form of revenge or to absorb the strength of their enemies. This practice, known as endocannibalism, was both ritualistic and terrifying, with participants consuming parts of those they had killed in battle or during raids. Now that's the taste of revenge. 20. The rat torture. In medieval Europe and beyond, one method of torture involved trapping rats in a metal container placed on a person's abdomen. The container was then heated, causing the rats to panic and attempt to escape by burrowing through the victim's flesh. This nightmarish method was used to extract confessions or as a punishment for severe offenses. If you survived this long with your food still in your stomach, then hit that like button and subscribe. Thanks for watching.